Welcome back to another episode of Post Whatever with Ken Nishikawa. When I moved back to Japan from the UK in December 1997, it was meant to be temporary. My visa situation got a little bit tricky, so I had to leave, but I fully intended to return to Blighty within 6 months. However, one thing led to another, and now I've been back in Japan for almost 30 years. You know how it is. I've got many expat mates in Japan, some of whom have been here for more than 30 years, and they seem entirely content with the prospect of spending the rest of their lives in the land of rising sun. Plus, there have been a little influx of Western celebrities in Japan. The name PewDiePie springs to mind. So today, I thought I'd put together an episode weighing the pros and cons of living here as a Westerner, mostly from English-speaking countries, but Europeans too. Things are admittedly quite different for people from other parts of Asia or Africa, but that's a whole new episode and one I intend to do properly rather than as an afterthought. So, without further ado, let's dive in. This episode is broadly for two types of people, I think. First, those entertaining the idea of moving to Japan at some point, if not forever, then for a good long while. With housing becoming laughably unaffordable for young people in the West, the Japandi movement has given a lot of them hope that they might actually own a house in Japan for next to nothing. Provided, of course, they're willing to gut it, rewire it, and possibly exercise it, as those trendy renovation videos rather conveniently gloss over. So evidently, to some, moving to Japan looks like an exciting, viable route to a better life, or moving to the promised land. Well, we shall see. Second, expats who've been here for a few years. Maybe teaching English or holding down some steady, respectable job with limited promotional prospects, wondering what on earth to do next. Go home or start taking this settling down business seriously. So, first things first, let's talk the dirty V word. Visas. Because I'll just figure it out when I get there. It's not exactly a plan, it's a cry for help. I've done it, I do not recommend it. The fastest route, as everyone will tell you within 4 minutes of meeting you, is marrying a Japanese national. The spouse visa. Efficient. Straightforward. Now, I personally hold the view that marriage is a largely meaningless institution. Except when children are involved, at which point some form of commitment ought to be formally recognized, given the biological responsibility attached. Outside of that, I don't fully grasp the concept, and I regard most weddings as a culturally confused cabaret at best. So for me, marrying someone for a visa is as good a reason as any. That's just me though. If you hold more traditional, romantic views on marriage, congratulations. I have zero intention of mocking you. The work visa. Technically, the specialists in humanities, international services, or engineer visa, because Japan does love a bureaucratic mouthful. It used to be fairly forgiving. Degree, job offer, off you go, especially if you're a Westerner. As of October 2025, however, offshore applicants now need JLPTN2. Sounds like a genetic code, but it is, in fact, conversationally fluent enough to argue with a landlord-level Japanese. As a hard requirement, not a nice to have. In other words, another small hostile flourish from our wonderfully xenophobic government. Then there's the digital nomad visa, new as of 2024, and about as generous as Japan gets with strangers. Work remotely, live here up to 6 months, no extensions, so basically not the final solution really. Must provide roughly 10 million yen a year in income plus travel insurance. Next, the business manager visa. For the entrepreneurially inclined, this one got a proper haircut. Used to require 5 million yen in capital and 2 employees. Sounds fair enough. However, as of October 2025, again, it's 30 million yen and a full-time local hire, plus again that N2 requirement. 6-fold jump. The government's official explanation is aligning with international standards. When our mighty yen plummeted to all-time low. Permanent residency. The long game. Good news, still achievable. Less good news, the application fee, historically a charmingly retro 10,000 yen, is now heading towards 200,000 with a legal ceiling of 300,000 yen. A 20-fold hike. Try that pricing strategy anywhere outside government and you'd be arrested for it. To make matters worse, from 2027, permanent residency itself becomes revocable. For skipping taxes, not renewing your card on time, or forgetting to tell the ward office you moved house. Utterly Kafkaesque, though Kafka at least had the decency to keep the bureaucratic labyrinth fictional. So, is there a theme here? Broadly, Japan is like a very polite landlord who keeps updating the lease terms right after you've settled in. Always with a smile, always with a bow, and always at your expense. So, you must navigate this treacherous ocean of bureaucracy, and I wish you all the very best doing it. 2 honourable mentions before we move on. They don't apply to everybody, but for those who actually do, they're highly viable and quite handy, I think. The working holiday visa, available to a fairly generous list of nationalities, including the UK, Ireland, Canada, Australia, and much of Europe, though notably still not the US. Age limits apply, usually 18 to 30, except the Irish get 35. Extra 5 years for, presumably, all their lives drinking Guinness, which is good for you. It lets you live and work here for a year, ostensibly to experience Japanese culture, which in practice tends to mean working in a hostel in Osaka and becoming unreasonably proficient at pouring highballs. Not a long-term solution, not a long-time visa. Think of it as Japan letting you try before you buy. And then there's the highly skilled professional visa. The one visa where Japan actually rolls out something resembling a red carpet. It's a point-based system. Education, salary, age, and career history all get scored. And if you clear the threshold, you're rewarded with genuine perks. Faster permanent residency, permission to bring in domestic staff, even visas for your parents in certain cases. It's Japanese government's polite way of saying, most of you will tolerate, but you, Dr. So-and-so with the PhD and the 6-figure salary, you, will actually roll out the tatami for, which again tells you rather a lot about the general shape of things. Enough of this depressing business of visas. I abhor the whole topic, but it's inevitable, so there you have it. Now the pros and cons of living here. Full disclaimer. This is 100% my personal view, but I've got quite a few expat mates in Japan and we discuss this often, usually over a glass of wine, in vino veritas, so to speak. I've also dated people of non-Japanese origin in the past, so I've witnessed firsthand what it's like to live here as a gaikokuji. Right then, compared with, for example, living in London as a foreigner, what's actually nice about living in Tokyo as one? First, Tokyo and any other Japanese cities, or villages for that matter, generally are infinitely safer. Put it this way, I regularly witness this with my mortal eyes. People at cafes leave their phones or wallet on the table to mark it as taken. before wandering off to the lavatory, even in Tokyo. Let me know in the comment where else this works, because pardon my ignorance, but I genuinely cannot think of anywhere. Tokyo is also about as clean as Singapore. There is a difference in method though. Singapore achieves it through famously strict Nazi-esque laws and eye-watering fines, whereas Tokyo manages the same result without such law enforcement, but largely through voluntary, self-policed morality, which has its own dark side, but that's a story for another time. I think the single most attractive aspect of moving to Japan for Westerners right now is the weekend. You can have some of the best meals in the world for less than half of what you'd pay at home. Real estate has been climbing lately, especially in urban areas, but it remains comparatively good value and affordable, especially to the Westerners. General people on the street and staff in shops and restaurants are, on the whole, polite and reasonably friendly and often go out of their way to help you. Work ethic tends to be high. Not always flexible, but that's because people honor rules dead seriously. People generally have a strong sense of pride and duty in whatever they do, whether that's a traditional craft or cleaning a public toilet, as the film Perfect Days, directed by Wim Wenders, rather beautifully depicted. I do like that about Japan, actually. All job is worthy, especially the essential ones, like cleaning the toilet. Medical care is generally good. Not free like most of Europe, but a different universe of affordability compared to the US. So I kind of place Japan in between Europe and US in terms of medical care and social security in general. Education, I wouldn't call it the best in the world, but it's okay. The school lunch is good and healthy. Public transport is said to be some of the best in the world. Punctual, reliable, clean, and safe. The downside of it is that it can be almost violently crowded, but that's a pretty widely known fact, I think. When people choose their holiday destination in the West, the usual criteria are beautiful scenery like white sand beach or lovely blue ocean, or historic architecture, art and culture, decent weather, good food, and above all, good value for money. In Japan, holidays are rarely long, and there's a curious national habit of traveling hundreds of kilometers purely for a bath, the onsen, the hot spring. And food is such an obsession that people will happily travel just as far for a single specific dish. I don't know of any other country with this degree of obsession with food, and also many regional culinary variations as Japan. Not just by prefecture, but by city, by neighborhood, occasionally even by street. Well, some admittedly invented fairly recently for the tourist trade, but still. The only country that comes close in my experience is Italy. Well, actually, Great Britain too has its regional specialities. Wales with faggots, peas and gravy, and Scotland with deep-fried Mars bar. I could carry on. Not the regional specialities in the UK, unfortunately, but the pros of living in Japan. But I genuinely dislike an epic-length podcast, so let's move on to the next topic. The cons. The obvious one. Renting a flat or apartment. Some landlords will flatly refuse you for the crime of not being Japanese. Strictly speaking, this is illegal. But without documented evidence, they generally get away with it. And I suspect many of them, in their blissful ignorance, don't register it as the plainly discriminatory behavior. So you have to kind of go through a special real estate agency specialized in non-Japanese tenants. They've got their own problems, but just know that you cannot just walk into a random real estate agent and expect that they'll welcome you. Sometimes they do, but not always. Working in Japan is its own controversial subject. The high work ethic in Japan often translates into long, hard hours if you're on the wrong side of it. And, more infuriating still, a tendency to avoid the more efficient way of doing something simply because that's how it's always been done. Combine that with the weak yen and you're earning considerably less for the same job, only slightly more grueling. My own advice: start your own business as soon as you can, or secure a remote work contract with Western companies and get paid in their currency, which stretches a lot further here at the moment, or work for a non-Japanese company. Seemingly trivial, but genuinely important gripe. Japan's rubbish sorting rules are notoriously intricate, and they cause more neighbourly friction than you'd think. People here are law-abiding and expect the same of you. That said, it's a bit like taking your shoes off at someone's front door. Mildly irritating at first, automatic soon enough. Then there's Japanese housing. The traditional wooden houses are charming to behold, but roughly as insulated as a cardboard box. Freezing in winter, useless air conditioning in summer. Worse than the temperature is the acoustics. You can hear practically every word your neighbors say. The newer state-of-the-art concrete buildings are much better soundproofed and insulated. But the social expectation of keeping your voice, music and TV low at night remains firm. Japanese neighbors are, on the whole, admirably quiet themselves. Well, not me, but most of them. And correspondingly, the least tolerant of anyone else's noise. Again, not me, but most of them. I don't personally mind my neighbor having a 3 a.m. party once in a while on the weekend. But many people do, apparently. Which brings me to a related point. For all the politeness of restaurants and shop staff, Japanese customers themselves are, generally speaking, not the politest in the world in return. Food and drinks arrive, and barely a thank you is offered. I always say thank you, but I'm very much in the minority there. In their defense, it's simply not the custom. I don't think there's a malice in it. Well, not always anyway. And oddly enough, restaurants here can be remarkably inflexible. I covered this in the previous episode, Vegetarian Life in Tokyo, so do go back and listen if that's of your interest. Again, I could go on my kind of rant, but that's probably quite enough to digest in one sitting, I think. So, at the end of the day, if Japan is for you, it is for you. If it isn't, it isn't. Much like everything else in life. All told, I do like it here. Genuinely. And if you have a genuine, lasting fascination with Japan, anime, manga, film, art, photography, architecture, design, music, tradition, or gastronomy, you should absolutely give it a go. As I said in the previous episode, the most difficult language in the world, Japanese is about as far from English or any European language as you can get. And that distance extends to the culture too. People often misunderstand this because Japan is a first world country and therefore things aren't that different from us. It is a kind of first world country, but culturally and the way people behave, it's quite different. Which is a large part of why it holds such fascination for Westerners. Well, at least some anyway. You know the cliché, the opposites attract each other. I always tell, especially young people, be it Japanese, British or whatever, live at least for a while somewhere your idea of common sense isn't common at all, where your normal isn't normal. It teaches you more about life, the world, and most importantly, yourself, than staying comfortable ever will. I'm sure I've barely scratched the subject of this topic. You know, life in Tokyo is very different from life in other cities, countryside or remote island for a kickoff. I'd like to turn it into a proper series actually, interviewing expats living here and getting their first-hand take if Japan is indeed the promised land for them. I know some of you listening to this show are expats or ex-expats, so if you'd be willing to share your experience, do let me know. On that note, this has been Post Whatever. If you found any of that remotely useful, or at least mildly diverting, do consider liking and subscribing. I'm Ken Nishikawa. Until next time, enjoy your culture shock.